Hi, Kylie. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Thanks so much for having me. And thank you for
No.
reading my book so quickly.
I, that's the least I could do after you accepted to speak to me on this. Um, yeah, it's great. I loved it to bits. It's such a great book. It's really different than I was expecting. But
Oh, I'm
yeah, I
so
loved
happy
it.
to hear that.
So I mean, the first thing I want to ask you about this book is I mean, obviously, it's very kind of centered around COVID, but I imagine that when you wrote it, you were kind of concerned about it being kind of timeless at the same time because it is set in a specific kind of time period. If like classics like Frankenstein and all these kind of things, they're not set in a specific time or a specific event. So I'm quite
Mhm.
curious, what kind of spurred you on to write about something that was so specifically set in such a specific moment in time that's so recent as well.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely is a risk in publishing, really
Yeah.
dating your book like that, especially with a topic that so many people feel so strongly about and have such trauma attached to, understandably. But for me, because this book was inspired, maybe inspired is, is not the correct word, was prompted
Yeah.
by the surge in anti-Asian hate crimes as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the whole idea of politicians calling it the China virus and both explicitly and implicitly blaming Asian people for the pandemic. It wasn't an element that I could really separate from the story. And I felt really strongly that I wanted to address that aspect of the pandemic, just because everyone has their own stories of the awful things that they went through during that time. But if you're not an East Asian person, I think that's something that might not have occurred to you is another level of, on top of everything else,
Sure.
that's something that many Asian people had to deal with. And so I really wanted to shed some light on that.
And I'm so glad that you did. At the same time, though, I imagine it was not an easy kind of theme or a book to sell because of kind of how closely of all the things that kind of this could kind of the backlash that could come with it. No, I mean, I'm
Yeah,
so
there
glad that you got it
was.
out there, but that must have been a risk for the publishers not to put
Thank
something like
you.
this out there. No.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely was a concern when I went out with my agent. She sort of put some feelers out to see if anyone would right away say, no, we don't want any COVID books. No one was quite that direct about
Right.
it, though I did get the sense that some, even though some editors liked it, their marketing teams were a little bit hesitant, which tracks with what I've heard from other authors, very well established, huge, much more successful than me authors who have tried to put COVID into their horror novels and been told by their marketing teams we don't want to do that. And
Yeah.
I can only speculate as to why they let me slip through the cracks here, but I would think it has something to do with what I was saying before about how COVID can't really be extracted from the plot of this book. Whereas if it's another horror novel and COVID doesn't play such an integral part, I can understand how a more conservative publisher might say, you know, why don't we take this out just to be safe, just in case, and the story won't change too much. Whereas
Mhm.
this book, I wouldn't have sold it if they told me I had to take COVID out. It
Yeah,
doesn't
sure.
speak to current events in the same way.
Hmm. But not just in terms of COVID though, but also kind of the themes that you touch on, kind of how kind of the Asian society is treated because of kind of how people are, especially kind of Trump and people like this, coined the term kind of the China virus and these things like that. That's something else that must have kind of made it complicated to sell the book as well, I imagine, no?
Well, I think publishers these days are thankfully a little bit more open to talking very directly about things like that. I've been lucky enough that in my young adult work, that also deals pretty directly with racism, though maybe a bit less so since it is
Yeah.
in a fantasy world. But that's something I've discussed in all of my work. I do think it is new, relatively new for the horror genre. There are lots of authors of color who are writing wonderful, amazing books
Sure.
that involve racism. I certainly don't mean to say I'm the first, but I think
Mhm.
compared to other genres, it is lagging a little bit behind. I think it
Right.
is still largely like a white man's game. But luckily, we're seeing more and more that publishers seem to be open to discussing things like racism and horror. Like we see everything Stephen Graham Jones is doing and Silvia Moreno
Sure.
Garcia and all these wonderful authors of color who I think are doing something really interesting with the genre. And I think that just is such a good fit for so many authors of color who want to use horror as a vehicle to talk about anger and injustice. Because I think marginalized people unfortunately have a very good understanding of what it is like to be treated like a monster. And so I think that really adds another level of nuance to the books that we write.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, my point being was that I'm so glad that it was picked up. But I imagine there was
Oh, thank you.
certain publishers, are obviously, because like you said, like it's very typical for white authors to kind of get their kind of mark on the certain
Yeah, I
genre,
mean,
no, but to be able
of
to
course they
get
would
this
never
out, that's
tell me
brilliant.
that. They would
Yeah,
never
sure.
say that that's why they don't want it. So I can never say for sure. It's always just, oh, we didn't really connect with this story or something like that. So I'll
Mhm.
never know.
Yeah, no, but I'm glad it's out there. Also, I mean,
Thank
obviously
you.
it's set in the COVID era, but at the same time, there's so much in there that's got nothing to do with it, which I'm quite curious. Where did those, I don't want to give too much away, but where did the kind of the religious aspects, the family aspects, where did they come from? Kind of
So
when you started with this idea of kind of setting it in COVID and because of things that happened in COVID, where did those ideas come from afterwards? How did you decide to bring
so
them into the mix?
Yeah, in terms of the religious aspects, right from the onset, when I started writing this story, I really wanted to combine it with some sort of speculative element. Most of my books involve some sort of East Asian folklore or mythology. And so I was researching the Hungry Ghost Festival at the time, and I was just so intrigued by the concept of these Chinese folkloric hungry ghosts that they're not honored by their descendants, and so they have these very thin necks because they're starving and they can't fit any food down, which is a horrifying mental image. And I think that kind of tortured ghost who is forgotten lends itself very well to a horror novel, but I also maintain that I think the scariest things in the world are real things. So
Yeah.
I was interested in writing a book that is both about a serial killer but also about ghosts. And so that was how I ended up incorporating Chinese folklore, and which is lightly tied to Buddhism in this book. And then in terms of the Catholic aspect of the religion, I have to be honest, I had just watched Midnight Mass.
All right.
And I was very that's another Catholic horror that I think is done so well.
Fantastic
And I also
series. Yeah.
think cathedrals are very creepy too. So I
Yeah, I
thought
mean,
that
that's
would
yeah. I
that
mean, you
would be a
actually said
fun
it. I think there's
balance.
a line in the book that says this entering the church is like entering a beast or something like that. I can't remember what it was exactly, but yeah. But
Yeah.
I love the fact that you had this. The central character is so skeptical about everything, especially
Yes.
religion. But then she
Hmm.
follows her sister like a religion almost. She
Yes.
follows. So I'm quite curious how that kind of aspect that you decided to bring this skeptical character as your protagonist, but at the same time, we're able to bring into the fold all of these different kind of religions and themes of religion, whilst and also the horror elements as well. Having someone that's so skeptical about everything, but at the same time, really does end up kind of diving into this and kind of believing a lot of things that typically she wouldn't have believed. No.
Yeah, Cora, I think, represents a lot of young adults in their like mid to early 20s just coming out of college who don't know what they want to do with their lives, sort of like treading water, trying to figure out what they believe
Yeah.
in, who they want to be, what they want to support. And I think the COVID pandemic really exacerbated that for a lot of young adults because the
Yeah.
world, everything was shut down. So
Yeah.
it's on top of the normal anxieties of graduating college and finding your place in the world. You need to navigate this whole new world that you never expected. And so Cora was a very interesting character to write in that I really wanted her to be the opposite of my young adult protagonists because all of my young adult fantasy novels have main characters who fight with swords or magic and they have this very clear important goal and they're violent and they're snarky, but I was so intrigued and also saddened by the idea of a character who didn't know what she wanted because I think that can be a huge problem in and of itself. I've been fortunate enough that I've always wanted to be a writer. I've always had that as my dream and my goal. Though I talked to some people who said, Kylie, you're so lucky that this is your dream because not everyone has a dream. And it's so hard to figure out what you want if nothing calls to you. And that concept, though it's unrelatable to me personally, was just very sad. And that's something I wanted to address in this book, maybe to challenge myself as a writer,
Yeah.
but also just to present a character who I think is in many ways more relatable just because she's more realistic and is very lost. So I think that's why she ends up latching onto her sister, as you said, because she just needs something. And her sister, she looks to her as someone who has things more figured out than she does. And so it's
Yeah.
really the only example she has to follow. She wants to feel like life is as easy as it seems to be for Delilah, though she later finds out it's not not quite as easy as she thought.
Yeah. So I mean, you said that you kind of you set that almost as a challenge to you because you had this dream that you wanted to be a writer. But I'm curious how you went about kind of getting into Cora's skin because, like you said, you knew exactly what you need to do. But this, I really felt like Cora was coming from personal experience. So I'm curious how you dived into her persona because it worked so well. I'm
Oh, thank
surprised that you
you.
said that you knew exactly what you were to do from kind of the get-go. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, her character, I was definitely feeling her out a little bit as I was writing. Mostly, I was having a lot of fun experimenting with style because this was my first adult book. And so I felt a little bit more free to try something, a different narrative style. It's a little bit more stream of consciousness than anything I've done before. So when I first started writing this book, I was definitely trying to emulate Stephen Graham Jones' style because I like him a lot. He has a very interesting tone in his books. And then as I started writing about the pandemic, what happened is that I inevitably started writing about Cora's fear of germs, which
Right.
sort of started taking over the narrative. And the reason is because I was, of course, trying to write about the pandemic from, my own experiences and something authentic, because, it's something we all went through. I wanted to write with some semblance of authenticity. But for me personally, with OCD, I couldn't separate that aspect of myself from the way I had experienced the pandemic. I didn't know how to write about the pandemic from any other perspective,
Right.
and I never will. So I thought, you know what, let's just lean into it and let's see where that goes. And it ended up intersecting with a lot of themes that I think lend themselves to horror. For instance, the whole one of the hallmarks of OCD is doubt, is not being able to trust things, even if you're sure that you did them or saw them.
Yeah.
And I think that lends itself very well to a character who is starting to see ghosts. And of course, any normal person would probably not believe that the first time you
Yeah.
see it, but of course it becomes that much harder if you really can never really trust yourself. And so I think her character unfolded organically in that way.
hmm Yeah, no, now that you say that, it really does work in that. It kind of because she see like we can tease that she starts to see things that she doesn't expect to see.
Hmm.
But normally, kind of the reactions wouldn't work. But because she doubts herself so much,
Hmm.
and that's why it really works so much. Ultimately, when she starts to see these things that she doesn't expect, she doesn't think
Yeah,
that she should be seeing. Yeah,
it's always hard to cross over that point when they finally accept that what
yeah.
they're seeing is actually in front of them. It's always hard to get there.
Huh? I mean, and on the same subject, the two friends that she works with,
Mhm.
cleaning up crime scenes, they're very different to her as well. They're quite kind of very distinct to her. Um, I'm especially interested in Harvey because he's kind of you bring a lot of his geekdom to kind of video
Yes.
games and movies into the story. Was that something? Was that you just wanted to kind of pay homage to kind of video games and movies by bringing this
Oh,
character, or was it the other way around? You wanted to bring a character that could share something that Cora really wasn't particularly interested in, but that you could kind of bring into the story and kind of make her believe in the same way that she's starting to believe kind of religions and things that she's been taught from her aunt and things like that when she was younger.
yeah, that's an interesting question. That's an interesting way to think of it. I mean, I can tell you what I was thinking when I wrote Harvey into the story is I wanted someone who was very desensitized to violence, but had not experienced much of it personally, at least on the
Firsthand, no,
same
yeah,
level as Cora, because I think that's very common these days, especially in America with all the violence on TV and in video games. I think a lot of people have, I mean, out of necessity, have separated what they see on a screen from what is real when, like, they have no idea what seeing real violence is actually like, to the point that fake violence doesn't really faze them. And so I wanted Harvey there mostly to change the way that Cora is perceiving gore and violence throughout the book.
right,
Because after she goes through this trauma in the first chapter, she wants to be like Harvey. Like she wants to totally compartmentalize everything in her mind, say, I can't see the person, so this gore that I'm cleaning up at a crime scene is just a mess. It doesn't belong to anyone. But then as she goes on throughout the story, the crime scenes become more and more personal, and she finds it impossible to separate separate the two. So that was really what I was going for with Harvey. I do play video games. I do have an appreciation for them
Yeah,
like
that
Harvey,
was my
but
next question
yeah.
because I wasn't sure if you kind of had it, you really weren't into those kind of those video games and kind of these old kung fu action movies and these kind of things, or whether it was something that you wanted to bring into the story because you actually do love those things. Yeah.
Oh, I'm not as hardcore as Harvey. I haven't played most of
Right.
the games that he's played. The games I play are like cute animated games. I play
Okay.
like Cozy Grove and stuff. I don't know. I tried to play Baldur's Gate 3 and I was like, this is so hard and complicated. So Harvey's definitely more of an expert at any kind of video game than I am.
And this, is that the same true about kind of the kung fu movies and these kind of things? Because there's some certain laws in there from kung fu movies that I totally wasn't expecting to you to bring in. And
Yeah,
that's kind of very far left field came in. Yeah.
that's not something I was exposed to very much growing up. It's
Right.
more something I read about later, though they do sound interesting. I can say mostly the Kung Fu movies got brought into it because there's a lot of information online about different ways to try to defeat Jiangshi, which is this other kind of Chinese folkloric ghost, which is more like a hopping vampire, sort
That's right.
of.
Hopping
That's
vampire. Yeah.
yeah. There's a lot of theories about how to defeat them. There really aren't any theories, at least not that I could find, about how to defeat hungry ghosts. And so I really needed the characters to have agency. So I thought, what if they try some of these jiangshi killing techniques on the hungry ghosts? So that was why I brought in the Kung Fu movies.
Uh-huh. And then I want to go back again to we were talking about racism at the beginning.
Yeah.
Something that was really, really intriguing that kind of was kind of underlay the whole story was the fact that Cora's not she doesn't feel that she fits in the US or as a Chinese person at the same time. So I'm
Mhm.
quite curious, what made you decide that as well to fit in with the actual horror of the book?
Well, I think that's sort of the inevitable consequence of writing a character who lives in the real world, but well, not but who lives in the real world and is some sort of marginalized identity. Like it would feel inauthentic to me to write a Chinese American character who interacts with the world in the same way as a completely white character. It's just sort of
Yeah.
what happens when you're exposed to different parts of society. I suppose that I was a little bit interested in the idea of her having two aunts from two different cultures. Just because as a biracial woman myself, I have many different cultures in my family who have many
Mhm.
different perspectives on the correct way to live life, and at the same time, the way that they see me as
Right.
being representative of, but also different from other Asian people, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
that I'm part of a family, so of course we all do our best to accept each other and bridge the gap across our differences. But at the same time, there's almost a language barrier, which is not literally about languages, but just the way that we see the world, which is something that Cora experiences with her Auntie Lois, who cares for Cora, but doesn't quite empathize enough with her situation because she's not Asian like Cora. And then on the other hand, we have her Auntie Zeng, who it feels like a representation of Cora's Chinese heritage, but something that she's been kept apart from just as the inevitable consequence of having been raised in America. And that's sort of my experience with a lot of my heritage, since my family has been in America for many generations, is the culture that I have has been filtered through a handful of relatives. So you
Right.
never really know how much of this is the way they would do it in China and how much of it is just this one person. Like how Cora says, she is not a good representation of the average American person. But, if that was all someone had to go off of, they would have a very weird idea of what America is like. So, in some
Mhm.
ways, this was a much more authentic character, more personal to my experience than my other characters, my other books who've grown up in different countries than
Mhm.
America.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked you the question is because obviously I imagine just kind of based on Cora's description of her family, I imagine that was kind of similar to yours in a way. So I'm quite curious, do you find yourself struggling a little bit like Cora does to kind of juggle between the two different heritages when you're writing a book, for example, to kind of do you find yourself second guessing things? What would my aunt think, or what would my sister think, or these kind of things, just kind of just because of the way that you've been brought up yourself?
Oh yeah, all the time. I
Yeah,
do as much research as I can. I'm very lucky in that my publishers are open to hiring authenticity readers, more so with books that take place in other countries where I haven't lived. But they've
right,
been totally open to having someone come in and do a quick read through and explain all the linguistic mistakes I've made.
right.
I do also have many friends and family who are more knowledgeable about different aspects of culture. And so if it's with any important decision, I like to run things by as many of them as possible, just so I can get a variety of opinions and not have just one person's take,
Sure.
which could often be a bit biased.
Yeah.
So I do worry about it, but at the end of the day, I feel confident in who I am as an Asian American and what I feel is appropriate for me to write. And I do my best, and I think that's what I owe my readers.
No, definitely, yeah, yeah. I'm obviously, I mentioned that you've got two characters that work with her as the crime scene cleaners. I'm quite curious
Yes.
because there's what I really enjoy, especially about this book, is it's got some certain kind of investigative elements in there. I don't want to give anything away, and
Yes.
it feels like you had. I don't know if you intended it from the beginning, but there's certain kind of aspects of like cop shows and kind of detective things there that I'm curious. Did you initially kind of decide to maybe have Cora be a different character, maybe in a different job beforehand, maybe like I don't know if a forensic scientist or a
Ooh.
criminologist or a cop or something like that, or was it always going to be the crime scene cleanup
Oh, that's a fun
worker?
idea. To be honest, I always wanted her to be a crime scene cleaner just because I watched a YouTube video about it several years ago and was so intrigued by the concept because it's a job I
Right.
think many people don't know exists,
Yeah.
but
No,
it's still
it
so
reminded me of this.
important.
Sorry to interrupt. There was a film that I watched. I can't remember the name of it now. One of the Baldwin brothers, and there was a woman who was a crime scene cleanup
Mhm.
in that as well. And that was a really good film. I'll find the film and I'll send you the name. But yeah, it
Yeah.
reminded me a little bit of that. And it
Yeah, I
worked really
just
well as well to kind of highlight what
it's
she goes through. Yeah.
exactly. I mean, it's such a gross job, first of all, which lends itself to horror. But also, I think it helped with her coworkers and her friends because, I mean, I don't want to be insulting to anyone who's a crime scene cleaner, but I feel like it's a job that people don't just stumble into. I feel like
Right. Yeah.
you need to probably have very good reasons for why you're doing it, which lends itself to character development. And I also think it tied really well into this theme of how some people are able to look away from things that make them uncomfortable and some people aren't. And so Cora and her
Yeah.
coworkers are forced to look at this mess that most people don't want to think about and pay them so that they never have to think about it. And that's similar to Cora's experience being Asian American and having to
Yeah.
deal with and think about hate crimes that other people can look away from.
Hmm. And then also bring it to light. I don't want to give too much away, but yeah, kind of them wanting to bring to light what could be happening is something
Mhm.
that was kind of goes with the whole bat eater idea. Was that something that was kind of when you came up with the bat eater idea? I imagine you wanted to find a job where they maybe stumble upon something that then is difficult for them because of who they are in that specific kind of period of time, to bring it to light and also to kind of to find justice. No,
Do you mean about how they're trying to talk to the reporter?
that's right. Yeah,
What
that's
are you
right. Yeah,
referring to?
I
Oh,
don't want to give too much away. That's right. Yeah.
no, yeah, no, it's hard. There's a lot of spoilers everywhere. I'm so sorry. What was your
Well,
question
just kind
about the
of, I mean,
reporter?
obviously, I imagine the initial idea for the book for Bat Eater was kind of from the COVID and kind of the Bat
Yes.
Eater, this idea that it was the China
Mhm.
virus. That was kind of where it stemmed from. But and then
Mhm.
in terms of them coming across certain things that were happening, maybe a serial killer, something going
Yeah.
on.
Mhm.
Was that an original idea from the get-go? Was that something that came about
Ah,
later that you thought you want them to be able to kind of bring this to light, but
I
also make
see.
it in this kind of put them in the same position as they've been put in the same position, kind of with the
I see what
Bat
you're saying.
Eater. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Writing them off, yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely something I wanted to write about from the start because the thing about hate crimes, again, it's hard not to give much
I
away
know,
here,
yeah.
but that, it's never one isolated incident that is decontextualized from everything else going on in the world. Hate crimes are a product of the society that we live in. So it would almost feel dishonest if it was just one hate crime at the beginning of the book and then never again. And that's sort of the point. And what I wanted to get deeper into is show the problem escalating in a certain sense, but then them discovering that it's something that was always there, but just it wasn't clear to anyone else. It was being sort of swept under the rug, something other people couldn't see or didn't want to see.
Mhm. Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, yeah. Mhm. And then there's also a lot of, I mean, we talked a little bit about how Cora's really, she's not um, very sure about herself. She's always followed Delilah's footsteps.
Yes.
But then you really kind of dig into to Cora's kind of psychology. Something that I love that you mentioned here is that she tries to imagine worst case scenarios to defang her fears, which I thought was a brilliant phrase. I've written it down. Um, I'm quite curious, when you're writing a book, do you think about worst case scenarios to kind of defang your story a little bit, to kind of set the limits of how far you want to take something, kind of think the worst thing, and then kind of reel it back a little bit to just kind of find the perfect balance between it being
Oh
authentic
gosh.
and realistic,
Wow. I
but
mean,
also kind of going as far as the horror will let you take without it becoming ungrounded, if you understand what I mean.
that's interesting. You know, I don't, but that's an interesting idea. I feel like more often than not, I do want to do the weirdest, craziest thing that could possibly happen in horror. That's more of a something I do in my own life. That's a therapy technique is, thinking
Yeah,
about if, worst case scenario, what would happen? What would I do? Because just, thinking about it in your head as this sort of formless, intangible worst, you can't actually problem solve, which is actually not, this is actually not a great technique for OCD. It's something I learned many, many years ago. But it's sort of the same theme as you see in a lot of horror movies. Like once you see the monster and what they look like, it tends to become less scary
that's scary now.
than
Yeah,
when you're
if
just
you touch it and ask it
imagining
what it
it.
wants, now like in the Sixth Sense or something like that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thought. No, maybe I should catastrophize more in my writing and not
Or
just in
maybe
my
you do in the
personal life.
editor. It's the editor's job to reel it
Yeah.
back now when you send it to them. No,
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
brilliant. And also, yeah, I mean, couple to that, she also physically speaking, she says there was one phrase where she said that she doesn't like thinking about her body working as kind of these different organs and the
Yeah.
blood's running through. She prefers to think of herself as kind of like a Lego
Yeah.
Lego brick or kind of a Lego figure. No,
Yes.
where did that idea come about to kind of to share that with the readers? Because it was kind of a moment where I was like, I'm curious why Kylie wants to share this idea with the readers. She just want to see herself as like as a physical, as a body with all these things going on inside of her body.
Yeah, okay, so there's a few aspects of that. One is that I think that's a very common thought process with OCD is just thinking too much about very specific details. I think bodies are really gross, especially like when Cora's in the eye doctor and you can like see the diagrams of what an eyeball looks like on the inside.
Yeah,
I hate that stuff. I hate thinking about that stuff. But in this story specifically, beyond my own personal like how grossed out I am by bodies, for in my line of thinking, it ties back to how Cora thinks about Delilah, because Delilah is her sister who is 100% Asian and Cora is half Asian. So it's very easy for Cora to idealize her sister, to think,
right.
look at this beautiful, perfect person. And so, of course, when you idealize something, you sort of think about it as a whole. You don't think about, well, look at her eyelash that is out of place. Look at she
Yeah,
has something in her teeth, the way that you do about yourself. And so Cora just very much wants to see herself in less detail. So she
right.
doesn't have to think about all the things that are wrong with her compared to, who she wants to be, just very straightforward and simple and everything is great, which is how she saw Delilah. So that was what I was thinking in terms of going down that
Right.
weird train of thought.
Uh-huh. Do you see? I mean, that brings me to the next question. Do you kind of, when you write your books, do you see that? Do you prefer to see it as a whole, or are you very kind of nitpicking? You kind of, I know it's something that, I mean, I don't like when I watch my interview, I don't like to see like certain things. I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, shouldn't have said that. So I'm imagining, when you finish the book, or is it difficult for you to finish a book and say, right, that's it, that's my Lego piece, it's finished, it's done, or do you kind of, you can't stop thinking about it as these little different sort of segments or the little stories that you've got inside the book?
That's an interesting question. I've never thought about that. I think I probably do think of books more on the whole. And
Yeah.
I'm saying that because of the way that I know some other authors approach their books. Like I know V.E. Schwab has said that she thinks of each of her chapters in her book as a short story that could
Right.
stand on its own. I don't do that. And also in my later stages of writing, um, I do become more lenient with my edits. At a certain point, I think I'm just aware that I get diminishing returns on
Sure.
tweaking sentences here and
Yeah.
there. It's not going to significantly impact how a reader enjoys or doesn't enjoy the book. So I know people, I have
Mhm.
many author friends who agonize over their
Yeah.
copy edits. And like, of course I do my best, but in the back of my head, I'm like, no one's going to put down this
Yeah.
book
You need
because
to
I
know
missed
when
a
to stop.
comma.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in that sense, I care more about it as a whole than on
Right.
a detailed level. It's an interesting question, though.
Yeah, no, I was just curious because
Yeah.
man, you said that about how you see the body. I imagine maybe you see other things in the
Yeah.
same kind
That's a
of
good
light.
point. I
Yeah.
hadn't thought of that.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So listen, I don't want to keep you too long, but just before you go, I understand that congratulations are in order, and you've just sort of you sold another YA book.
Oh,
It's going to be coming
yeah.
out fairly soon. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even I haven't kept track of what's been announced. I have sold another
I
YA
think
book. It's
yeah,
it's
because I
not
think you
really a
mentioned something on
secret, but
Instagram or something the other day. Yeah, you mentioned that I think you
yeah.
had lifted £100 and that also you'd sold a YA book or something like
Oh,
that.
you saw that. Yes, I
That's
have
good. Yeah.
sold another YA book, so thank you. Can't say much about it yet, but I don't think it's a
Right.
secret that it's been sold at this point.
Uh-huh.
But thank you.
Brilliant, really. And I also want to I want to speak a little bit about the before I go. I can't not speak about the covers because we've got this artwork, which is I think it's the UK version,
It
no?
is, yeah.
And then you've also got the other one, the Bat one that's coming out
I
soon.
do. This is
Uh-huh.
the US version.
And then
So very different.
and then there's the other release. I think it's also a UK release. Not that they've done a special
Yeah, there's an
release, which is
Evernight
fun.
edition as well,
That's right, the
which is
Evernight.
it's
That's
very
fantastic. I
lovely.
wanted to try and get hold of that before the interview, but I couldn't get hold of it. It was
Those are hard
took
to
too
get a
long. But
hold
that's
of.
beautiful. No, there are some still left over, I think, but it's fantastic. Yeah. How
Oh, I'm
involved
so
are you
glad you
with
love it.
those, especially with the special edition, because there's a lot of the kind of the Chinese kind of lore, folklore that you mentioned, the kind of the ghosts and those kind of things, the hungry ghosts.
Mhm.
How involved are you in the artwork?
Oh, so not super involved, to be honest, which
No.
is fine because I trust the art team. Like with the
Right.
UK cover, I only saw a mostly final draft where the bottle was like slightly like cut off at the top. I was like, can we get the whole bottle in the shot? But that was,
Right.
and then it also I changed the Chinese characters on the side, but that was the extent of
Right.
my involvement with that cover. With the Evernight one, it's an artist who I love, who is so talented, and they just sent me a sketch. I said, great, perfect. Looks
Yeah.
great. Like I'm not good at visual art. I'm just so amazed at what artists can do.
Right.
So really, I didn't have very much input in this particular book for the covers, but it all turned out great, and I just
Yeah, no,
said
it's great
thumbs
because
up,
it's
perfect.
like I said, the book wasn't what I was expecting, but I actually did see the Everlight artwork, and I was like, I didn't expect like these ghosts and all these kind of things. Yeah,
It's very
but
different.
once I read it, it really, it kind of it's exactly as you explain it in the book. It kind of really works really well. Yeah,
Yeah, it's very different. I think with the UK with the bottle cover, they were going for more of like a thriller vibe, whereas
right.
in the US they're trying to market it as more literary, I suppose, and so
Not
that's
literally
why the
horror, no.
difference in
Yeah,
covers.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. No, they're both great though. Yeah,
I'm very
and
lucky.
yeah. You can't complain. Yeah. So listen, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so
Um,
much for having me.
I love the book, and that
I'm
was
so glad.
it wasn't a struggle for me to get through it over the weekend because
Great.
it was so good. Yeah, it was
Oh, that
fantastic.
makes me so happy.
Uh-huh.
Thank you so much.
I mean, obviously you've had plenty of feedback already from the UK, but I wish you all the best of luck with the release on, is it the 29th of this month? I think it
It
is.
is. You got it. Thank you
Uh-huh.
so much.
So I wish you the best of luck with that, and I hope to speak to you again sometime soon about the next book that
Yes,
you
you
publish.
too.
All
Thank you
right,
so
thank you
much,
so much for your
Howard.
time, Kylie. All the very best.
Great.
Best.
You
Have a great
too.
day.
You
Cheers, then. Bye
too.
now.